I usually don't have too much trouble figuring out what I want to talk about, and this week was a little different. I kept batting different ideas around, and nothing was I was really landing on. I realized that I've been making for myself keywords for the week. As I look at my schedule, I've been writing out my schedule, things I want to accomplish, goals that I'm setting, trying to be a little more deliberative with my time and my goals. And I usually have 2 or 3 keywords that I'll write down. And for this past week, I had written patience, patience, and patience. So I decided I need to preach on patience. So that's what we're going to look at. Is patience a virtue? Can I have book, chapter, and verse that says patience is a virtue? Anyone quote that for me? I don't think you can. It's believed that that phrase would have derived from a 14th century poem. Patience is a virtue. Well, is it? We'll look at that a little bit this evening. Now, I'm not discussing about being calm in stalled traffic or when there's too many shoppers in front of you at the checkout line. Although I did read that the average American spends 42 hours annually stuck in traffic. That's not really what I'm talking about. If patience is to be a virtue, it must be virtuous. It must be of high moral standard. There must be some inherent worth in patience for patience to be a virtue. If I'm just waiting quietly for my turn in the checkout line in traffic, I'm showing civility. Maybe I'm showing politeness or kindness, perhaps, but I'm looking for what might have a deeper impact on myself and others as I'm talking about patience this evening. Behavioral science research says that when I experience intense emotions such as anxiety, fear, or anger, my body produces both brain waves and chemicals which actually will warp or distort my sense of time. Chemicals that will distort my sense of the passage of time, thereby prolonging the experience when I'm under intense emotional strain. My endurance is challenged by this phenomenon. And I think when you look at things such as in Psalms chapter 13, we can see an example of that. And this is just one of, I think, several examples of someone who's experiencing that unease, that feeling of why is time passing the way that it is because of stress or strong emotion. Oh Lord, how long? How long, O Lord, wilt thou forget me forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart all the day? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? A psalm of David. And you read that and you go, okay, David, maybe you're just a little dramatic here. Does it strike you that way? And I think too, as you read the rest of the psalm, you get that David admits that he has trust in the Lord, but it's that feel, that anxiety that our bodies don't handle patient endurance very well. I don't know why we have these sensations that we do, but David's psalm reflects, I don't remember who used to use this phrase, stinking thinking. Have you ever heard that? And it's just kind of, he's a little out of his element here by saying the things that he says. But it's a common human experience, I think, to have that sort of idea. I don't want to be patient. I don't want to wait on the Lord. I don't want to accept that some things are on a different timeline than that which I think is appropriate for me. I don't think this is anything that's a surprise to us. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6 that today's troubles are enough for today. I forget which translation I lifted that from. But that's not how we look at the world, is it? It's generally not how we look at things. Impatience has its roots in frustration. A feeling of rising stress that starts up whenever I feel that my needs or my wishes are being ignored. Ignored by whom? Ignored by my family, maybe the workplace, maybe school, maybe I'm anxious because I think God has forgotten me and is not giving consideration to that which is important to me. Proverbs talks about a situation, I guess you'd say, or a condition. In Proverbs, the first chapter, you have, of course, wisdom personified. I'll just say God, but it's the personification of wisdom. And wisdom is called out in the streets. She lifts her voice in the square, so on. And she says, down around verse 24, because I called and you refused. I stretched out my hand and no one paid attention. And you neglected all my counsel. And you did not want my reproof. I will even laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your dread comes. When your dread comes like a storm and your calamity comes on like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come on you. Verse 28 says, then they will call on me, but I will not answer. This is a demonstration of a lack of patience. This is what lack of patience feels like. As God's wisdom reaches out to us and tries to establish in our heart, I want you to see the world from a different perspective than you're looking at it right now. I want you to adjust your timeline. I want you to think about ignoring the wisdom of God and what that means. And wisdom is going to say, you're going to be frustrated if you ignore me. And it's going to be, in so many words, on you for refusing wise counsel. But that impatience, that rejection of wisdom, that idea that my priorities should take precedent over everyone else, can cause also a feeling of insecurity. I think that others may be judging my life choices or my opinions. And so in anxiousness, I want to avoid that feeling. I'm going to seek maybe shortcuts to gain someone's approval. And this can set me on a separate course from godly patience. I want to find the quick fix because I'm uncomfortable with the fact that I've rejected God's wisdom. I'm not listening to my friends. They're saying, hey, you might want to take another look at your life and some of the choices you're making. But I'm impatient. And my impatience causes stress and anguish, which causes a distortion of my sense of time, which causes me to get more impatient. Ever hear someone say, well, I'm just over it? That was a phrase I think I used to hear more than I do today, but people will say, I'm just over it. This is research from this year published by the University of Texas. It says people will work harder or pay more money now to conclude a transaction sooner than otherwise might occur. And so from my perspective, that feels like, well, I've made a smart, decisive action when I want to check that box and get something off of my to-do list. No, that's showing judgment, isn't it? Isn't that what we want to do, is work that list? But that's not a good reason to disregard God's timeline or the timeline of someone who may be affected by my choices. So I conclude from what I've shared with you already that patience is a virtue. There is something inherently valuable in establishing in my heart that there's just a slight possibility that when I am frustrated, when I am looking at my life and plans aren't coming together like I thought they were going to, and there's delayed action, and maybe the delayed action is even my own doing. As I lay plans, I get too many balls in the air, I start dropping things. But when I get that feeling, there is a more prudent course of action through a more prolonged timeline, depending on the situation. But especially in light of the fact that the universe is not serving at my bidding. I do not command all of everyone else and all of the universe to do what I want it to do. So it only seems natural that I should develop a greater sense of patience as a virtue, as something that will have a better effect on my life and the people that I influence. So that same research from the University of Texas observes that with this frustration of waiting, it does grow as I approach that anticipated end of my wait. And I thought immediately of the kids around Christmas time. And at least in my household, there was a calendar and there was a big X every day. And we're counting down to Christmas, and it's only 8 more weeks and it's only 5 more days. And as you get closer and closer, the anxiety increases and the excitement increases. And in a child's mind, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But as an adult, we can experience that too. The frustration with waiting grows as that which you're waiting is approaching. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 4 says, love is patient. Love is patient. How do I apply that? How do I use that idea? As we grow frustrated, as we grow busy, as we don't see things coming together, as we don't see the growth in our life that we'd like to see, or the growth of a friend or family member, I think it's very easy to grow impatient with the people close to us. As we see opportunities to grow, as we see opportunities to mature, and we don't see the maturity on the level that we're looking for. I think it's real easy to grow impatient there, and love is going to be patient. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 2, to me, indicates that patience is one of the keys to unity. Well, how's patience a key to unity? Ephesians 4 and verse 2 says, and walk in love just as Christ also loved you. That's not what I want. That's the 5th chapter. With all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing forbearance to one another in love, being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. With all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing forbearance. Forbearance is one of those things you do when life is happening at the right pace for me, but you're either behind my timetable or you're ahead of my timetable. That's when I have to forbear you, right? But then you have to do the same for me. When you're on the right path and you figured out how things are going to go forward and you're satisfied with the progress toward a particular goal, then you have to be patient with me because I'm out of sync with you. So it's a two-way street. But patience, I think, is underrated. I have stood here right behind this very pulpit and said, I used to have more patience than I do now. And I still think that's probably true. And so that's something I need to work on. Is being willing to synchronize myself with those around me and with my Lord, so that I reduce that frustration of being out of step, so that I can see how God is working through me and working through others. What is my timeline? What's the timeline of my friends and my family? What's God's timeline? Do we know? Are we aware of that timeline? Often we're not. And I think that also contributes to the value that, or the idea that patience is a virtue. Because there's something inherently good in giving people deference in time. And recognizing that we're not always on the same page. And that God's expectations in my life, I may be pushing against something that I should be growing in, or I may be ignoring an opportunity to be more at peace with God. I think patience and peace are also very similar ideas as one develops the idea of patience being a key to unity, being a key to being in sync with God's timeline. How do we calibrate ourselves to be in alignment when we don't know the timeline of others? I think that's a measure of flexibility, perhaps, a measure of forbearance, as the word already mentioned, a measure of tolerance, and a measure of appreciation for the differences in people. We're not all wired the same way. We don't all tackle problems in the same way. We don't all see opportunities in the same way. And so patience says, well, if my timeline's not working out, we'll try your timeline and see how that goes. And we'll try to work together instead of working in disjunction with one another. Colossians chapter 1, beginning in verse 9, says, "For this reason also, since the day we heard it, we have not ceased to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you may walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, to please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God." This is all good stuff here, right? "Strengthened with all power, according to his glorious might, for the attaining of all steadfastness and patience, joyously giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light." There's a prayer here to be filled with the knowledge of God's will. All spiritual wisdom and understanding. Verse 9. When we find ourselves frustrated because we're impatient, the very first place to think about making a change is God's will for me working through me? Is that really what I'm working on? Or am I working on something that I want? Have I convinced myself that my will is in fact God's will? And so when things don't happen according to my schedule, then I think, as David said, well, God, where are you? How come you're just going to leave me hanging out here to dangle all on my own? Why aren't you working with me on this? It's time to evaluate the motivation for what it is that is so important to me, and understand that I may need to recalibrate. And having an understanding of the wisdom of God and these things in regards to increasing in knowledge, it's not going to be like a light switch that we can turn on and off. There's going to be some hard work and some perseverance in developing patience to see my life as other people see my life. My tendency is to see it through my own lens. And I need to be open, as the Colossian letter suggests, to going back to the source of all that which is good for me, and deciding that maybe my frustration is I'm off on a tangent and I thought it was God's will. And I don't want to be the one to be judgmental of your goals and aspirations either. Because I may look at things and say, I don't see how that's going to help you grow. I don't see how that's really going to improve your relationship with God and with other people. But as I mentioned before, I'm not in command of the universe. It's not for me to decide what that relationship with God looks like for you. As long as I don't see open rebellion, that's for you to decide. But I think if we can do that process, then we will have less problem with being impatient in our own lives. I think it'd be more successful. Stan read from Hebrews chapter 6 for us about the patience of Abraham, I guess. It says, when God made a promise in Abraham, verse 13, since he could no longer swear by one greater, he swore by himself, saying, I will surely bless you and will surely multiply you. And thus, having patiently waited, he obtained the promise. What is your evidence that Abraham waited patiently on the Lord? Well, let's see. His wife was barren, and he was promised a great nation. I know I'll get the concubines to have some children, and I'll sire those kids, and that's how God's going to fulfill his promise to me. Now, was that God's timeline? I'm traveling in a foreign country, and I know God will protect me. I know he'll take care of me and my wife, but I'm going to lie about her because I'm afraid of being victimized on the road as I travel. Was that according to God's timeline? What about his intent to offer his son as a sacrifice to God on the mountain? Was that according to God's timeline? It would appear that Abraham had to walk that journey of understanding God's intentions for him and develop a sense of patience. His reaction to being told he would father a great, great nation was, well, that's just ridiculous. But years later, after having now seen that this son is that investment and the time raising that child, and you can't hardly imagine, I can't imagine the love and care and concern Abraham would have shown that child, thinking, this isn't just the child, this isn't just our child, this is the child that's going to father a nation. I'm going to make sure this kid's okay. I've really got to look out for him. So I think Abraham walked a journey of patience. Titus 2, verse 2 says that the old man are to be fitted with endurance or patience. That's usually not a young man's game. That's usually as we get older that we develop that. We can start now. We don't have to wait till we're old if you're not there yet yourself. But that is something, again, that grows with time, develops with time, and with experience. And so if we're impatient about not having patience, then there's still hope, I think. Romans 8:25 says, if we hope for what we don't see, with perseverance we wait eagerly for it. So patience is about living less by sight and more by faith. How do we know God's timeline? How do we know it? How do we find ourselves in peace and calm spirit, when it's so difficult to know God's timeline? How do we do that? Because I think when we set goals, I generally don't set goals that I know I'm going to expire before I can satisfy that goal. My goal is to be whatever, I'm going to go to Mars. Okay, I'm going to be the first 80-year-old man that flies to Mars. That's my goal. Well, we better get busy on a Mars program if I'm going to do that in 20 years. I better work on my calisthenics if I'm going to ride in a rocket ship at age 80. That's not a very realistic goal, and it's not, I just don't set goals that are that unattainable. But with God's timeline, we may just have to walk the entire desert before we reach our goal. We may have to walk the entire desert before we reach our goal. And in Moses' case, he walked the entire desert. And he was not admitted to the land that was promised to the faithful. And some of us might look at that and say, well, God really shortchanged Moses. What a deal. He faithful all these years. Yes, he had his problems. Yes, he sinned. But God walked him right up to where he could see into the nation that was promised to them, and he was denied access. What was God's timeline? God's timeline perfected Moses. It may never have been God's intention for Moses to be in the land of promise. But instead, he was taken up. So can we say that all that work and all that effort and all that prayer that Moses offered on his behalf and on behalf of the nation, can we say that was to no effect? No, I don't think we can. God rewarded Moses in a different way than Moses anticipated his entire adult life. So was Moses shortchanged? I don't think he was. Some of us may walk the entire desert, and some may walk the desert and never reach an exit from our desert. Does that mean that God has forsaken us? No. And that's what patience is for. To appreciate that God may have a different answer, and it may be a better answer than the one we've been seeking for. Hebrews chapter 12 talks about us running with endurance the race that is set before us. And Jim, I bet you've got in the closet somewhere one of these sheets that's got a big track on it, don't you? You got a big track on one of those sheets, don't you? So Hebrews 12 talks about running that course. And I think we see other runners. I think our eyes are then fixed on what? The prize, which is Christ. And I've always seen that in my mind as that's Jesus standing at the finish line with a big black and white checkered flag, and he's ready to drop that flag when you come across the finish line. That's not how I see that now. Because this is not an oval. Sorry about the poster. This is a road course. It has its ups and downs. It's got muddy holes. It's got fences that you don't see that you got to traverse. It's got pitfalls. There's probably some snakes in the weeds. This is a road course. It's not a nice oval. And I'm not sure that I see the finish line. This is an over-the-road course. And it's an endurance race. And I have my eyes fixed on Christ because he's my coach. He's my trainer. And he's the one that says, as I'm running, he's running right along beside me. You can do this. We're going to step over that foxhole there. We're not going to get tangled up in that barbed wire. But I don't think I see the finish line. That's how I want to see Hebrews 12 myself now, compared to maybe how I used to look at it. And I'm okay with that. We don't know the course of our life. We know there is a finish line. But am I near the goal? Do I have a lot of running still to do? Are there going to be any detours? Am I going to twist an ankle in the next rabbit hole? I don't know. But I think if we see that Jesus is who we fix our eyes on as we run, I think we're seeing our greatest fan and our greatest rabbi, teacher, who is right there beside us saying, I know you can make the course. Even though I don't think I can see the finish line anymore in this illustration. You do with that what you want. If you want to keep the oval, you want to keep Jim's poster, that's fine. I'm not going to debate it with you. But I think that to me is why I've got my eyes fixed on Christ instead of a checkered flag. Romans chapter 15, I think also harkens back to this idea I mentioned a minute ago about our patience is paramount to our unity. And I think as we run the race, I think this is so important that we circle back to this idea a lot. Romans 15, beginning in verse 4, for whatever was written in earlier times was written for our instruction, that through perseverance and the encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope. Now may the God who gives perseverance and encouragement grant you to be of the same mind with one another according to Christ Jesus, that with one accord you may with one voice glorify the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, and therefore accept one another, just as Christ also accepted us to the glory of God. When I'm out of sync with you, that's when I grow impatient. When I think that my timeline is the right one, that's when I grow impatient. And if I'm going to live in unity, I need to show deference. I need to show consideration for how other people are running the race alongside of me. And this is one of those races where you can cheat because someone can come and scoop you under the elbow and help you along. Put you on a stretcher and drag you across the finish line for all I know. But we could use that help. And if I'm going to be living in unity, I'm going to have to accept one another. And that means I got to be patient with people. People that frustrate me. I don't know how bad I frustrate you. You have to tell me sometime. But I know some of you frustrate me. Okay? Let's just be honest about it. Some of you do. But I'm going to be united in goals and aspirations and a desire to cross the finish line together. God has given us these tools of patience. It says in verse 3 of Romans 15, for even Christ did not please himself, as is written, the reproaches of those who reproach thee fell upon me. Christ took the reproach that was due us. How patient was Christ, knowing he came to the earth to die on the cross. He waited his whole life for that. What was the level of anxiety as that day approached? How did Christ deal with that? He did it for others. He didn't do it for himself. If I'm going to live in unity, I need to put my timeline aside. I need to work on your timeline as best as I can. Patience is necessary for salvation. Romans chapter 2 says, God's kind patience and forbearance leads to my salvation. James chapter 5 talks about those who endure and what that means in their life. James 5 and verse 7. Be patient, therefore, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. Behold, the farmer waits for the precious produce of the soil, being patient about it until it gets the early and late rains. You too be patient, strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord's at hand. Skip into 10. Verse 10, as an example, brethren, of suffering and patience, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we count those blessed who endured. You have heard of the endurance of Job, and you've seen the outcome of the Lord's dealings, that the Lord is full of compassion and merciful. Patience is essential. Patience is essential to our salvation. Because otherwise we won't endure. We won't stick it out. We won't stick it out. Over in 2 Peter and verse 3, and beginning in verse 13, according to the promise we are looking for new heavens and a new earth, in which righteousness dwells. Therefore, beloved, since you look for all these things, be diligent to be found in him in peace, spotless and blameless. And regard the patience of our Lord to be salvation, just as also our beloved brother Paul, according to the wisdom given him, wrote to you. So we're not the only one being patient here regarding our salvation. It's also the patience of the Lord. And what does that mean? God's forbearance. God adjusting to his people as he needs to, so that we can be successful. God gives us these things for our good. Over in James chapter 1. I'm going to leave you with this thought here. James, the bondservant of God and the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes who are dispersed abroad, greetings. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. How can we be perfect? How can we be lacking in nothing? In fact, verse 4 says that it is perseverance that has its perfect result. There's only one way to lack nothing. And it's not because I fulfilled everything I wanted to on my timeline. It's not because I got it done. Because I set the right goals and I worked the right way. No. The only way to have this level of perfection is for endurance and patience to be within us, so that God can have mercy on us. So that God can say, this is one of my children who is willing to trust in me even if they're still in the desert and there's no exit. That's patient endurance. That's what I want you to see in talking to you for 40 minutes tonight. I get frustrated when I don't get things done my way. But I can do them God's way and still not get them done. Do you see the point? But God says, if you can do that with patience and endurance, then I will perfect you. It's not by how good of a job I did at fulfilling God's will. It's how hard I wanted to fulfill God's will and made it the focus of my life. Not whether I actually attained all the things that were set before me. I fail at those regularly. And God offers that patient endurance. It's a way to have that peace, knowing that when we're insufficient, God fills in the rest. Like wisdom said, if you don't answer my call and calamity strikes, I'm going to scoff at you. That's on you. But if we answer the call to God's wisdom and we apply ourselves patiently with endurance to his will, God will perfect us. Patience is absolutely necessary for salvation. If you don't have the peace tonight, if you don't have the assurance that you are running that road course and that Christ isn't there right beside you as you have your eyes fixed on him, as he's coaching you, as he's consoling you, he may be carrying you for all I know. But we can't run that course without him. We can't do it. If you have a need to express your commitment to God, commitment to Christ, if you need to be baptized, let us know what we can do to help you this evening as we stand and sing.